notes, twin governmental activities, multi-transitional training exercises, multi-candidate, multi-party, simultaneous training exercises respective to smooth transition. Amended item for insurrection, rebellion, and parties who have violated the Constitution and Articles of the United States. Parties may or may have not committed acts of war. Items dealing with attacks upon archives. Items that have mandatory death penalty written constitutionally respective. These types of items bring forth a unique transitional training program in which we have to lay out a smooth transition understanding to deal with the various complexities that can come about. Communications transition, Justice Department and appropriate entities. Respectively, the estimate at this current time is that various parties are involved in insurrection, rebellion, various activities concerning foreign and domestic spy and espionage interest. The current estimates respective to the mindset that is perceived to be the intent of various parties is that they are intending to continue course respective to their various activities. Activities do include illegal behavior, RICO behavior, unconstitutional behavior, violations of constitutional listings that respectively would come with the death penalty, violations concerning destruction and intent to cause destruction to archives. In a nutshell, we have an extremely long list of parties that are involved in violations and intending to continue forward in their violations. We have parties who are not operating or utilizing logical intent with respect to needed speedily addressing of current items that are of great importance. The current estimates indicate that these parties will continue their behavior. So in frankness, to discuss some of these areas, we're looking at constitutional violations involving the destruction of artifacts older than the Constitution of the United States. That means parties are facing death penalty. We have effectively rebellion attached to more than just both main political parties. We have, frankly, a huge complexity of criminal behavior beyond the capacity of the justice system and the judicial system to be able to handle the material. Estimate at this time is that it is believed that only 20% of the justice system and judicial systems are working properly. Official crime rate is something that cannot actually be tabulated, since we have a series of complaints that have been verified respective to mass changeovers of phone change-out mechanisms. In effect, we have a form of rope-a-dope runaround phone systems that are with no intent to render valued services. We have citizens basically that cannot get through to justice services. We have an array of consideration respective to justice services from the lowest levels, from the local levels, on up to the highest levels. That the definition is that there are parties in rebellion still. There are parties involved in forms of what some people would call skullduggery. We, in effect, have a situation where, according to the Constitution and Articles, we have parties, in effect, connected to the two main parties that have committed acts of war against other candidates. From my personally witness spot, it would seem that there is every reason to believe to move forward with investigations because of found evidence and fragments that clearly indicate beyond a RICO situation, and that members of both political parties have committed acts of war against a single campaign. This effectively changes an understanding respective to modern interpretation as well as dealing with original constitutional edicts, laws, a base situation involving modern transitional understanding now encompasses more than two political party transitional training aspects for the purpose of smooth transition to the presidency. Evidence that has been repeatedly shared publicly brings items beyond the shadow of a doubt that information has clearly been harvested respective to the understanding that acts of war have been committed by these various parties. Parties particularly in question that beyond the shadow of doubt, the documents and eyewitnesses have acted in conjunction with discoveries of mass criminal activity respective to overall activity, and also considering individual campaign, Michael Crosby for president campaign. In effect, we have a situation where mass criminal activity is being stated publicly in conjunction with one known as Donald Trump. The relationship that he is not apparently, but is in fact a convicted felon. Numerous cases being filed around the country and processing have significant numbers of people being convicted, respective to obvious understanding that additional pleadings and filings and various cases shall be added concerning Mr. Trump. the statistical likelihood that this person can somehow avoid all criminal prosecution and somehow be certifiable would seem to be an impossibility. Respective look at the Democratic side is that we have a situation involving Julie Su, $31 billion in fraud discovered, extended additional investigation by the PCPT, presidential candidate panel on treason. This is connected to the Michael Crosby for president proclamation for candidate for presidency, has determined additional information, has additional evidence respective to the activities of the following parties: Julie Su, Shirley Weber, Kamala Harris, current members of the AG and other party of state of California, and other governmental agency parties, respectively located throughout the state of California. The evidence effectively shown publicly proves beyond the shadow of a doubt that mass criminal behavior is detected in conjunction with Julie Su, that mass blacklisting has occurred, that mass numbers of parties have filed and won judgments against the state of California with respect to Julie Su. The Michael Crosby for President campaign confronted Shirley Weber repeatedly, and the Michael Crosby for Governor campaign confronted Shirley Weber as well. Written documents that would require action immediately were ignored. Parties respective to the office of the Secretary of State would seem to acknowledge certain types of information, but would refuse to get involved and act properly. The clear understanding that the state of California, in effect, shut down the income of a gubernatorial and presidential candidate. This type of activity is deemed an act of war by the Constitution and Articles of the United States. No one is allowed to shut down the income cores of a presidential candidate. The situation is further modified by attacks upon an archive. It is also considered to be illegal constitutionally and by articles to attack archival interest. It is illegal to be in dereliction of duty, of constitutional oath. It is illegal for parties to refuse services respective to items that have a tie to constitutional oath. This evidence has been repeatedly shared with governmental entities. It has been publicly shared. It has been noticed by the public. It has now publicly been recorded an uncounted number of times as it has been added into the making of language models from parties who have grabbed data from public sourcing and utilized it in the construction of large language models. In effect, the evidence and direct documentation displayed has become part of historical record, even at private levels. The United States Archive has a series of documents filed that indicate a history of various activity ongoing, respective to establishing certain key facts and intent of movement to return stability to the nation and protect the process of elections and restore and repair archives that have been damaged by insurrectionists or parties in rebellion or parties in dereliction of duty, etc. This evidence is conclusive. The additional evidence processed by the state of Arkansas prior in previous election cycles indicates that the state of California has refused to prosecute police officers that were fabricating material and utilizing it, blacklisting. The state of California has been engaging itself in blacklisting respective to a presidential candidate on more than one election cycle. Kamala Harris, previous AG, refused to take action to prosecute parties that were guilty, parties that needed to be prosecuted for attacks upon a presidential candidate, for attacks upon an archiver, for attacks upon an archive. Any situation that causes blacklisting or the lessening of income to an archiver or an archive or a presidential candidate is in fact considered to be an act of war. These items obviously are also considered among the list of high crimes. In effect, we have various situations of which we do not know whether or not some of the parties involved were spies, foreign nationals, foreign or domestic spies, involved in espionage, election rigging. Although we can say that we do see clear election rigging by different parties, but when looking at previous segments related to the Kamala Harris situation, we can bring that in conjunction forward and to look at a clear understanding that apparently the state of California does not have an adequate list of significant numbers of parties that would be deemed spies that should have normally statistically been revealed had the state been participating in proper investigations. This having been said, we can compare the understanding of what would apparently seem to be 0 spies investigated, 0 spies caught by the state of California, respective to federal procedures that have caught spies in actual agencies, fired spies, prosecuted spies. The clear understanding that infiltrations occurred and were proven beyond the shadow of a doubt at the federal level are a fact. The considered statistical average number for the reality that must translate out into some form of presence in various states, including and specifically the state of California, shows a clear anomaly problem. The federal government, according to publicly shared information from Robert Mueller, Russia investigation, other investigations, states that spies were known to be operating in the state of California, were believed to be interfering with the process of elections, but we have no appropriate and proper matching investigation done by the state of California respective to this situation. We have a non-reflective situation that brings out a series of anomaly factors that proves beyond the shadow of a doubt statistically by empirical methodologies, that even on the quick look, that there are huge deficits and clear evidence that the state of California has acted improperly and has been, in the very least, in dereliction of duty. Even considering these as a raw statistical understanding, it clearly gives reason to believe to process items forward. Respective to anomaly factors involving parties that would be in governmental positions that may not be considered mentally stable or appropriately mentally balanced, is recognized as a statistically highly likely realization in numbers that I would deem significant. Effectively, in layman, one could say there's not necessarily going to be a guarantee that you're going to find a den of spies. Although they should be there statistically. There'll be a certain number of spies. But what is guaranteed is that you will find people that, in layman's terms, are bananas. That is to say, some form of crazy. This, respectively, would have to be items dealt with on an individual basis with psychiatrists, psychologists, etc. Respective behaviors of parties that have acted in an anti-tactical table logic are unacceptable to maintaining adequate national security and adequate protections to the process of elections. The effective investigative boards of California, respective to elections, have very serious flaws in the lack of tactical table realities and the recognition of necessary RICO procedures for the protection of witnesses, property, and locations. They're mandatory to make public all elements of all filings of attacks upon candidates, respective to tactical table logic, means that these parties give no consideration to the necessity to protect archival information that has come under attack by forces and or decentralized forces, in which security is a problem because the state of California is, on the whole, a direct participant for attacking incomes of candidates and archives, causing deficiencies financially and creating deficiencies in adequate security measures to be taken as deemed necessary and to be effectively put into effect. In layman's terms, they've caused a security problem. The logic of revealing locations, respectively, that have been attacked publicly, for which there is no money restored yet from the state of California to return a reasonable course of security and protection, means that the created philosophy of the board and legislators in California has created a system that is tactically flawed at the root core of its arrangement structure. And the structure actually jeopardizes national security. It jeopardizes security of archives. It jeopardizes the process of elections. It jeopardizes candidates. It jeopardizes health and safety. It jeopardizes a list of items that continue. This form of anti-tactical table logic brings forth a dilemma when parties must consider the wisest moves for protecting material pertaining to national security, the process of elections, and to keep it protected from decentralized forces. It's worth noting that, in effect, that the logic strategy being used by California election protection boards is actually aiding and abetting decentralized forces with fronting out targeting locations that have poor or no security. This is illogical beyond comprehension. This could be deemed an act of treason by legal logic. It is imperative that on the whole, that the best logical course of strategies is at least attempted or maintained. The extreme duration involving various parties and the dilemma of dealing with what would seem to be a form of conundrum created by the various forces in California that are in rebellion and dereliction of duty leave a serious problem to national security, the process of elections, health, and safety. The reality that the Michael Crosby campaign, that Mr. Michael Crosby has had 2 attempted assassinations against his life by gunfire. The situation in modification overall to understand the security structure and risk factors in the state of California. One can look at the January 6th investigations, in which early on it was clear that there was going to be a number deemed 87 or more convictions of members of law enforcement or agents that were respectively employed within California. Additional estimates from parties who have independently investigated indicate the association for each one of these parties would bring forth a much greater number of additional shared sympathizers and or participants, which would be considered at a number of no less than 30 per participant. Thus, we must take the number 87 and times it by 30. This brings about the reason to believe that there is a major breach problem respective, as well as a major threat problem ongoing in the state of California by government employees that effectively are certified to carry firearms. There has been no effective investigation, as far as my research indicates at this point in time, by the state of California to identify properly all of these parties and move forward with necessary procedures as necessary to reduce the threat situation. The effective suspect list of parties who have attacked the Michael Crosby for campaign deals with numerous election cycles, more than 14 locations in recent history, 2 attempted assassinations by gunfire. This means that we have an untenable position that clearly brings about significant reason to believe that at the very least a RICO situation is ongoing, respective to the process of elections in California. Additional research indicating that rebellion and insurrection is far higher nationwide than has been reported in the media as general, or even disclosed by the government. Sadly, the situation here has the justice system also not working properly. We have breaches at the highest level of the lower courts, at the Supreme Court level, repeatedly. This has been public. It has been widespread on the media, shared, And these breaches go throughout the judicial system. The judiciary is not operating properly and is lacking in the full understanding of the balanced understanding of cybersecurity problem and cross relations. In effect, the research of the Michael Crosby campaign indicates there's 1.4 billion cyber attacks per day, and that far more than 90% of these attacks deal with null zone creations, parties that create stunted zones or impeded zones for the purpose of manipulating stocks or sale of cryptocurrencies, etc. This type of strategy does not use a credit card. It does not use a direct attempt to overthrow parties' communication systems. It simply inhibits parties, but has, in effect, done damage at mass levels and is considered the greater part of mass damage that has occurred nationwide. The overall statistics perceived from research by the Michael Crosby campaign for president, Michael Crosby gubernatorial campaign, is that more than $10 trillion in damage is occurring per year in the United States, and that a similar number in damage is effectively also occurring in Europe. Tracking back to a sad note that in effect situations must continue forward with the presidential candidate panels and even the presidential candidate panel on treason due to constitutional oath requirements for which the candidate is on written file with written oath. The respective constitutional necessities to protect the process of elections, to protect archives, to protect national security, to protect artifacts, to protect various items of technological research, the list goes on, is something that is a mandate that brings forward the necessity to continue to move presidential candidate panel powers forward. This is perceived as truly unfortunate that parties would continue to force emergency hierarchical authority to be pressed into service that is required to follow certain constitutional procedures and is empowered greatly as though a high court. Constitutional descriptions state unlimited ability for the presidential candidate panels to be able to do full trial procedures and appeal to the U.S. Senate repeatedly. These writings bring about the significant association of a placement that places the authority as though a separate special authority with the clear understanding from written determinations by forefathers as a body that is supposed to be conducting repairs to the nation as well as protecting the nation. The reality respective to constitutional oaths mandates that it is impossible for the Michael Crosby for president and the gubernatorial previous efforts to withdraw from active participation and standing. The constitutional oaths require parties to stay committed to protecting the Constitution of the United States. The ongoing situation ensured that both major candidates running for office by reason of numerous amounts of evidence, are unfit and illegal participants as candidates, and by Constitution definition are disqualified as candidates because they have participated in acts of war, insurrection, and various other arrays of activities. This is a very serious matter because it means that Michael Crosby presidential campaign cannot withdraw. The enormous amount of financial compensation due to the Michael Crosby for President campaign, as far as the archival on loan assets and respective archival holdings, nonprofit, of the candidate, when considered chronological tracing back to the gubernatorial cycle in which blacklisting was occurring and has continued to occur, in which monies were owed that were ordered paid by Congress but have not been turned over, that a various array of dereliction of duty and other ongoing charges, definitions require a continued forward commitment to constitutional oath and the protection of the Constitution. The financial disposition from damage goes back to previous election cycles, all the way back to Kamala Harris being AG and even some before. The enormous amount of evidence established by investigation by other states proving beyond the shadow of a doubt that parties deliberately fabricated citations stating that a vehicle had no plates, that there was no record of the vehicle having insurance, that there was no record of the vehicle paying its taxes or having tabs, when in fact the vehicle plates were right on the vehicle. And when they requested a readout, the state of Arkansas responded and gave a full green, in the clear, comprehensive list stating items were fully issued, that insurance was still valid and on file. The ridiculousness of the police officer to put forward such a ridiculous citation is among the clearest example of harassment and forms of anti-constitutional behavior and attacks upon a candidate filed running for the presidency of the United States. Paperwork was verified out of Arkansas. And understanding at this point that the complexities and number of participants are so large that previous legal analysis historically in the United States would state fair case reasoning structure to literally disqualify both major political parties and have them ordered disassembled. This is effectively not said with any form of humor. That previous history indicates that there is every reason to believe that there are too many violations respective to these two major parties, and that they would be disqualified as parties. A clear notation that obvious extreme action of a significant nature must be taken in order to repair various situations or consider the deactivation or disassembly of these political parties. This is something, as a legal note, that must be fairly weighed and extensively investigated. Deep concerns over other activity concerning various other members of both parties leaves forward extensive reason to believe that various activity is of the highest concern and is perceived to be that perhaps, or deemed to be a definite understanding as a guess, as a considered belief as an absolute, that the Justice Department has a far more extensive series of investigation and facts concerning which parties have participated in various activities that would be unconstitutional and be with some sort of stated slant, reasoning, definitions. The logic here is that the PCP and PCPT should work with the Justice Department to look at these items, that there should be good reason to do so. The enormity of such a job is something that has to be looked at as not necessarily within the wherewithal of the current situation. Item here is stated and recognized that it does exist and that the Justice Department does have knowledge respective to certain activities that are of concern, and the opinion is that there does need to be processing. That having been said, in effect, the opinion here is that it is the PCP and the PCPT's opinion that the Justice Department should have every reason to believe to move forward processing various other materials concerning its concern about parties that may not be trustworthy, may be coming from tainted angles, may be acting with improper motivations. And we believe that there's an extensive list behind that. That seemingly would go beyond the normal flaw factors of what could be reasonably expected. The Michael Crosby for President campaign is stating an awareness and a willingness to continue to look at this situation, and is open for suggestions from parties in departments respective to any aforementioned situation. At this point in time, the logic of moving forward, continuing to claim transitional rights, is proper. It is also necessary. It is also required as a constitutional oath mandate to be committed to protecting the Constitution of the United States and the core level understanding of the preservation of law. In effect, at this point, moving forward, stating that in theory these items are open and should be in motion on the desk, but the realities of the lack of funding are also a problem. Stating additional solutions and respective forward movement, legal logic, moving to plain talk, so to speak. Effectively, we need to consider the economic situations of the complexities before us. The transition must move forward with high priority items that must also be included, deemed economic recovery. Included in this understanding, the perceived belief of the transition that the Michael Crosby for President acting forward has the clear intent as president to move legal procedures from multiple departments, as well as moving the transitional understanding of the White House legal teams forward in numerous respective areas in order to conduct repairs necessary. Among the priority list, the current belief is that the United States government on the whole, as a generalization, is responsible for the backdoor computer problems because of previous decisions made by parties to have a leverage into discovering terrorist and foreign entity activities and intent to commit violence and other items. The liability aspect, again, is considered to be that the government is liable. The competitive world comparison tactical table suggests that an absolute minimum of 5 computers need to be effectively issued per citizen, each of which must have language model capability as a standalone power. Respective understandings to changing backdoors and the need for a brand new chip system with no backdoors states a mass commitment to new chip manufacturing, which of course means new engineering. The estimates of what might be doable versus what is considered to be financially available is that the current envelope would state that $160 billion a year for 4 years would not be significant to handle the true tactical table needs, and that figure would likely be hard to get approval for. Therefore, $80 billion a year is considered to be the outline commitment to deal with new chip engineering, construction, and stimulus. $80 billion for 4 years. It's each year for 4 years. Additional projects for dealing with the deficiency computive power would have separate consideration funding for the previously mentioned 5 computers per citizen. This could be looked upon as bulk purchases and significantly reduce the cost per unit. Moving on, next additional item is a need for restoration and stimulus. It is the determination that I am running with for my presidency and transition that American citizens have repeatedly been denied rights legitimate in many areas: civil rights, land ownership, guarantor insurance loans for construction of new hard assets, namely homes and extensional understanding, some of which would be business. Therefore, it is the decision to keep with transition to set up and begin a process of listing and promoting an understanding of long-term vested citizens, those who would have one or more relatives or one or more connections that would have gone back historically 150 years, stating that these parties would be inheritors of long-term clear activity where devastation and civil rights violations have clearly occurred. In effect, this would vary as to benefits. Respectively, we are looking at some states, 7 out of 10 people would qualify in that category. Some other states, 9 out of 10 would qualify. Respective understanding here for the restoration plan is to look forward and move the fastest for guaranteed loans and guaranteeing the bankability of labor, to put forth for the purpose of new construction and allow citizens to be owner builders and be guaranteed loans with completion insurance packages and assistive added packages wrapped up into the entire package system, where any form of advice needed would be encompassed into the cost of the overall project and deemed to be, in effect, connected to the long-term loan management system. In effect, this area includes people in which we do not identify credit rating discrimination to be allowed whatsoever. Therefore, parties that do not even have a job qualify for this program. The program is in theory to grant 7 construction projects per citizen to be, in effect, put forward and activated immediately upon occupation of the White House. With respect to considered legal anomalies and legal skullduggeries, transitional science indicates the possibility of 2 or more legitimate considerations that temporarily the confusion of the flaws of the justice system and various judicial systems and other factors bring forward reason to believe that a candidate that has had acts of war committed against them does not have to withdraw and is a valid candidate, and that the other candidates could end up being falsely given authority when they were supposed to be disqualified. Therefore, we can have twin governmental understanding. This is to say that it is valid for transition to move forward with more than one candidate. And I'm going to say, in effect, with multiple candidates, with more than, it can be a greater number than that. In theory, legally, we can be talking about 3, 4, 5, 7. But in likelihood, we're probably talking about 2. Although it can be 3. So we're talking about the likelihood of twin governmental authority and the ability to recognize that there truly is valid arguments for processes to continue forward. To establish dealing with this, setting up a special board to effectively rate different ideas respective to items necessary, either legally and for national security, must be considered. In fact, multiple boards is logically what is and should be considered. To move forward with the emergency restoration of new housing construction. Again, these are not loan opportunities for people to go buy pre-made homes. These are opportunities that are only attached when parties are the owner builder. This is going to mean dealing with the land situations. This deals with the long-term stated plan that dates back prior to 2005, but is not necessarily publicly known. The stimulus plan was covered, and there should be significant remaining items referring to it dating back to 2008, 2012, 2014. There should be YouTube videos still in existence that talk about at least some of this material. Moving the items forward, we are to establish a methodology to begin immediate list of parties who are qualified to be granted these capabilities. When considering that legal processes can be complicated and that there could effectively be different zones in which different legalities or legal definitions might have individual states or given areas eventually siding with candidate arguments, such as, in theory, 1, 2, 3, 5 states, 7 states might recognize one candidate because their evidence is clear, acts of war were committed against them, and by virtue of evidence that these other candidates are disqualified, which means that we can have multiple presidents. So, as this transitional item moves forward, we also deal with delegate disqualification, because the law states with respect to these items, constitutionally and articles, that they must be completely resolved before the allowance of counting of delegates and or certification occurs. This means that items can even be proposed up into even after counting, but before certification. Someone merely can verbally proclaim and raise hand and say, foul. And as this campaign is stating foul, we have a registration of foul. This effectively means that in conjunction to evidence that's already been laid, that in effect that the delegates of the state of California cannot be counted. This would indicate that it would be impossible for Kamala Harris's campaign to gain enough delegates to be granted the win. An additional consideration is that other arguments against Donald Trump would indicate that he's not valid either. These are complex. Of course, these matters also deal with the fact that California is not cooperating with funding owed that is desperately needed to continue the investigations to identify all of the violent attackers and all of the parties who have attempted assassination against Michael Crosby. But they do not participate. This is something that is unacceptable. Moving forward, establishing the list of parties who are qualified respective to the 7 construction plan, which includes some business interest, effectively will move forward. The commitment to doing this plan will move forward. A commitment to hard assets, which will afford the effective leverage capability of the U.S. government to be able to have a differential printing factor of 30% as a raw estimate. This is to say the understanding that the wholesale development cost of a retail valued home of $300,000 is generally capable of being brought in at $210,000. That's including land and labor cost. This means that effectively the government would be able to print at least $90,000. This becomes both a stimulus to government as well as a stimulus directly to each and every citizen that participates. This is considered to be a wise forward movement and stable action. And it is here so deemed decided to continue to proceed in transition with this plan as solid and valid. Continuing with additional plan aspects, which will be extensive, we are mentioning the secondary major plan of mass water projects to be throughout the Arkansas and Mississippi rivers connected. This plan has been laid out as an example, as though if just looking at Arkansas, to bring forward a co-op situation and issuance of stock and residuals to the citizens of Arkansas, in which the plan designation is designed to be able to pay an absolute minimum of $12,000 per citizen by virtue of the water sales. This in effect, as a plan, is designed for other states as well. Differential values are anticipated in the equating of how it will work in each state. But a commitment to a mass water plan is necessary and makes all logical sense. The water will effectively be made available for those states in interest that need water. Obviously, Western states are in need of water, as well as many central states. This mass water project will, in effect, build small lakes, ponds, and many extended water projects. In effect, part of the plan is for mass refoliation, the mass planting of trees, with an understanding that in this we are to plan to plant more trees and use a rapid growing technique. Again, plant more trees than the world is currently cutting down. This is effectively also a plan that will not only harvest lumber, make arid areas livable once again, restore health to wildlife, help in controlling fires, but will also absorb enormous amounts of carbon and represents the single largest effort to addressing the greenhouse effect. This effectively concludes the morning notes respective to transition. I thank you, Michael Crosby, candidate for POTUS 2024.